So Sufism is the inner mystical tradition connected to Islam and is said to predate the religion itself, having incorporated elements of Neoplatonism and other systems of thought. There are more than one origins of the word suggested. One is derived from the word suf, S-U-F, which means wool, and refers to the woolen garments worn by some practitioners, and another is from the word safa, S-A-F-A, which means purity. The Sufis believe strongly in a direct connection with God or the divine. It is very similar to the Bhakti movement in India, as the guiding force in both is love of the highest and the purest kind. Also, like Bhakti, this love for the divine is often symbolized by earthly lovers like Krishna and Radha in the Hindu religion, and Majnun and Layla in the Sufi. The Sufi poets like Rumi and Hafiz often speak not just of the joys of love, but also its pains, and state that these pains are essential to understand the true nature of that love. It is really saying that on the spiritual journey, you will have to go through many difficult experiences to blossom forth as truly spiritual beings. Like Zen, little is said of reincarnation or karma, but in Zen in particular, it is hinted at quite a lot. The reason it wasn't mentioned more is probably because the Zen teachers wanted to emphasize living the life here and now and not being held back by any concepts. Also, I believe that in Japan and China, when these teachings were at their height, reincarnation and karma were just taken for granted and so need not be taught. So perhaps it was similar in the early days of Sufism. The Theosophical glossary, which is written by H.P. Blavatsky and others, has an entry on the subject of Sufism, giving yet another derivation of the word. It says in the glossary, it's from the root Sophia, wisdom. And she says it's a mystical sect in Persia, something like the Vedantins, though very strong in numbers. None but very intelligent men join it. They claim, and very justly, the possession of the esoteric philosophy and doctrine of true Mohammedanism. The Sufi or Sufi doctrine is a good deal in touch with Theosophy, inasmuch as it preaches one universal creed and outward respect and tolerance for every popular exoteric faith. It is also in touch with Masonry. The Sufis have 4 degrees or 4 stages of initiation. The first is the probationary, with a strict outward observance of Muslim rites, the hidden meaning of each ceremony and dogma being explained to the candidate. The second is metaphysical training. Third, the wisdom degree, when the candidate is initiated into the innermost nature of things. And fourth, final truth, when the adept attains divine powers and complete union with the one universal deity in ecstasy or samadhi. The Sufis then believe that the path is a submission to the will of God or the divine, to allow the divinity in us to become our guide. That in essence is the whole of it, but there are many methods developed to facilitate this process. One of the leading texts is this, The Secret Rose Garden by Muhammad Shabistari, which is a collection of poems written in the 14th century by Sheikh Mahmud Shabistari, who was born in the town of Shebistar near Tabriz in 1288 AD, where he received his education. It is considered to be one of the great classical Persian works of the Islamic mystical tradition, known in the West as Sufism. The book was written about 1311 AD and was written in response to 17 queries concerning Sufi metaphysics posed to the Sufi literati of Tabriz. In English, the book's title is variously given as The Guardian of Secrets, The Guardian of Mystery, the mystic rose garden, or the secret rose garden. And the last is the one I am using for this talk, based on this book, which is the one I have, which was first published in 1920 with an excellent preface by Florence Lederer and later introduction by David Fidela. I do a separate talk just on the secret rose garden, but it's so deep. But here I'm just going to include a section from the Florence Lederer translation concerning Sufi symbolism. So in Sufi poetry, certain phrases are used to denote spiritual truths. For example, embraces and kisses are raptures of love. Sleep is contemplation. Perfume, the wish for divine favor. Idolaters mean men of the pure faith. Wine, which was forbidden by Muhammad to his followers, was used as a word symbol to denote spiritual knowledge. And the wine cellar means the spiritual guide. A tavern is a place where the wine of divine love inebriates the pilgrim. Intoxication means religious ecstasy. Mirth, the joy in the love of the deity. Beauty means the glory of the beloved. Curls and tresses mean plurality, veiling the face of unity from its lovers. The cheek means divine essence of names and qualities. The down is the world of pure spirits, which is nearest to divinity. The mole on the cheek is the point of indivisible unity. The torch is the light kindled in the heart of the beloved. So the Sufis realized that it is impossible to describe that which is even beyond pure spirit. Plotinus or Plotinus, the Neoplatonist, has told us that we must not be surprised that that which excites the keenest of longings is without any form, even spiritual form, since the soul itself, when inflamed with love for it, puts off all the form which it had, even that which belongs to the spiritual world, which is very interesting. So it's saying it's impossible to put into words an experience beyond words. So we can only use pointers and our intuition. Those who rely totally on their intellect will never understand works like The Secret Rose Garden, as it is only beyond words and concepts that the truth can be experienced. So the book is a series of poems revealing truths that can be seen to coincide with Theosophical teachings, such as you are plurality transformed into unity, and unity passing into plurality. This mystery is understood when man leaves the part and merges in the whole. You are plurality. I always find that word difficult to say. Plurality, transformed into unity, and unity passing into plurality. This mystery is understood when man leaves the part and merges into the whole. Or the past has flown away. The coming month and year do not exist. Ours only is the present's tiny point. Time is but a fancied dot ever moving on, which you have called a flowing river stream. I am alone in a wide desert, listening to the echo of strange noises. You are asleep, and your vision is a dream. All you are seeing is a mirage. When you wake up on the morn of the last day, you will know all this to be fancy's illusion. When you have ceased to see the double, earth and heaven will become transformed. When the real sun unveils his face to you, the moon, the stars, and Venus will disappear. If a ray shines on the hard rock, like wool of many colors, it drops to pieces. The world is an imaginary figure, a diffused shadow of the infinite. One breath created the worlds of command and all living things. The imagination produces phenomenal objects which have no real existence. So this world has no substantial reality, but exists as a shadowy pageant or a play. All is pervaded by absolute being in its utter perfection. There are many numbers, but only one is counted. So this can be recognized as pure theosophy. I could go on quoting such beautiful poems from the book, but I hope that perhaps some of you who are interested may look for it afterwards. It is available for free online, as well as for sale on Amazon and other places. But every verse has symbolic meanings that can be used for deep meditation. So another one of the leading texts in Sufism is the Conference of the Birds by Farid Uddin Attar, written in the 12th century AD. And this was also written as a poem. It concerns symbolically the perilous journey of a number of birds to find the mysterious Simurgh, who is portrayed as a kind of godlike figure. A hint on reincarnation is given when Attar, in his invocation, says that to know oneself may take 100 lives, but to know the divine, something more is needed. It is like Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, saying in the final chapter that he is now going to reveal the highest secret that can't be gotten by study or meditation, but only by devotion to the highest. So the birds assemble for the journey, and the hoopoe emerges as their leader. This is the hoopoe giving the instruction. Emerges as their leader. As she says, she has intimate knowledge of spiritual matters. One by one, the birds find excuses not to go on the journey. The nightingale says that he loves the rose too much to leave it, but the hoopoe tells him that such love is transient and he must find a deeper, more permanent love. The partridge says that his love of precious stones precludes him from the journey, but the hoopoe says that they are just coloured stones and he must seek the true treasure. The parrot longs for immortality, but the hoopoe says that even the longing for immortality is a barrier to true understanding. The hoopoe reprimands the sparrow for taking pride in humility. That's an interesting phrase, taking pride in humility, and recommends struggling bravely with oneself. She states that the different birds are just shadows of the Simurgh. If they succeed, they will not be God, but they will be immersed in God or the divine. If they look in their hearts, they will see the divine image. All appearances are just a shadow of the Simurgh. Those loving truly do not think about their own lives, and they sacrifice all their desires. Those grounded in love renounce faith and religion as well as unbelief. One must hear with the ear of the mind and the heart. So the hoopoe goes on to speak to a total of 22 birds who all have excuses as to why they should not go on this journey. But the hoopoe says, so long as we do not die to ourselves, and so long as we identify with someone or something, we will never be free. The spiritual way is not for those wrapped up in exterior life. The hoopoe uses various Sufi tales to illustrate her points. So it's well worth those interested to get hold of a copy of this book and read it for themselves. Justice can't be done in a short talk. So the birds are convinced in the end and have to pass through 7 valleys to reach the goal. The first of these valleys, whoops, I've gone off. There we are. This is slightly different than the ones I have in my on my script here. So here it has the valley of knowledge, 2 the valley of repentance, valley of stumbling blocks, valley of tribulations, the thundering valley, the abysmal valley, the valley of hymns and celebration. But in mine, it's slightly different. Mine's more in tune with this next one. So the first of these is the Valley of the Quest, where the birds have to endure many hardships. The second is the Valley of Love, where they discover that love has nothing to do with reason. I think we can all identify with that. The third is the Valley of Understanding, and it teaches them that material knowledge is fleeting, but true understanding is eternal. In the fourth valley of independence and detachment, one has no desire to possess nor any wish to discover. To cross this difficult valley, one must be roused from apathy, to renounce inner and outer attachments, so that one can become self-sufficient. The fifth is a valley of unity, in which they learn that though they may see many beings, in reality, there is only one. As long as you are separate, good and evil will arise. But when you lose yourself in the divine essence, they will be transcended by love. When unity is achieved, one forgets all and forgets oneself in the sixth valley of astonishment and bewilderment. Hupo declares that the last valley of deprivation and death is almost impossible to describe. In the immensity of the divine ocean, the pattern of the present world and the future world dissolves. As you realize that the individual self does not really exist, the drop becomes part of the great ocean forever in peace. In other words, one reaches nirvana. In Theosophy, we learn that there's a choice to go into nirvana or renounce it to help humanity. Whether there is a similar choice in the esoteric side of Sufism, I don't know, but guess there may be an equivalent. So thousands of birds set out on the journey, but only 30 reach the end. This here is the Simurgh. These birds discover that they are the Simurgh and merge with the divine. They discover that Simurgh means 30 birds, as it was all meant to be from the beginning. I haven't found a connection between the number 30 and the Simurgh, though. But it's interesting that the number 7 is used for the 7 valleys, etc. As in Islam, they're said to be 7 heavens. And of course, the number comes up in many traditions, and also, of course, in Theosophy, as the 7 principles in man, 7 rounds and races, and 7 sub-races, etc. So it is interesting how it permeates the teachings of most religions. But that is another story, as they say. So the conference of the birds is symbolic of the spiritual path that we all must tread. It also looks into the many excuses we make to prevent us from treading it. We are too much attached to the transitory world to realize that it is all just a passing dream. We set ourselves up in this world as if we are going to be here forever. And in fact, we are only here for a few decades. But conversely, we are caught in the illusion that life ends when we dispense with the physical body. But there is that part of us that does not change, the real individual. It is a dimension to our being that is aware of change, but itself does not change. That sees that although the body ages, within we will never change or die. And this is the Theosophical interpretation of the 7 principles from the Key to Theosophy. We see that the lower personality, the Sthula Sharira, Linga Sharira, Prana and Karma, these are the ones that change constantly. But Atma, Buddhi, Manas at the top is the upper triad, or the individuality, which is the same through all the lives. We call it the Sutratma, or the thread soul, because all our personalities are strung upon this thread like pearls. So it is essential that we realize that we are spiritual beings and try to take that stance in our lives. How we do this very much depends on what kind of person we are. Some need a more clinical and scientific approach to the path. Others follow the tranquil way of the Buddha, but others prefer a more passionate way. And that is provided by Sufism. It is a supremely mystical path, although some schools of Sufism do teach a complex cosmology. And there is the famous poem of Rumi, which most of you will have heard, where he says, I died from minerality and became vegetable. And from vegetativeness, I died and became animal. I died from animality and became man. Then why fear disappearance through death? Next time I shall die, bringing forth wings and feathers like angels, after that soaring higher than angels. What you cannot imagine, I shall be that. What you cannot imagine, I shall be that. And this, of course, echoes the teaching of Theosophy about evolution and other genuine spiritual traditions that we evolve through the various kingdoms, through the human stage and on to higher realms, the realm of angels or Tian Chuans, as we would say. It's also interesting to note in this translation that he goes even higher still and says we will go on to be something we cannot imagine. And he calls it that, which is a word used in Vedantism to indicate the absolute. All this is that. Like the Bhakti followers of Hinduism, the Sufis believe it is hard to develop love for an abstraction. Therefore, they visualize the divine as a being, but also being aware that this is also a temporary device and aware that they will pass through this stage. Also, their concept of God in any sense is much deeper and more metaphysical than the Western one. There's no sense of anthropomorphizing God. It is a deeply spiritual conception. Rumi talks of two kinds of intelligence, which are the same as the head and heart knowledge in The Voice of the Silence by H.P. Blavatsky. He says, there are two kinds of intelligence. One acquired, as a child in school memorizes facts and concepts from books and from what the teacher says, collecting information from the traditional sciences, as well as from the new sciences. With such intelligence, you rise in the world. You get ranked ahead or behind others. In regard to your competence in retaining information, you stroll with this intelligence in and out of the fields of knowledge, getting always more marks on your preserving tablets. There is another kind of tablet, one already completed and preserved inside you, a spring overflowing its springbox, a freshness in the center of the chest. This other intelligence does not turn yellow or stagnate. It's fluid. It doesn't move from outside to inside through conduits of plumbing learning. This second knowing is a fountainhead from within you, moving out. Beautiful words. And there's Rumi, looking very intelligent in a spiritual way. The emphasis on love is the main focus of Sufism. There are tales that symbolize this love, as there are in other devotional systems, as mentioned earlier. One of the main tales in Sufism is that of Majnun and Layla. Inayat Khan, who was a very a Sufi teacher, he says, Layla and Majnun have been characters for Sufi poets, as Krishna was for the poets of India. Majnun means absorption into a thought, and Layla means the night of obscurity. The story is from beginning to end a teaching on the path of devotion, the experience of the soul in search of God or the divine. Even getting into popular culture, as Eric Clapton and Derek and the Dominoes wrote a song called Layla, which is about Layla, and one of the songs on the album is actually some verses from the poem. But the name Majnun has also been translated as possessed or indicating a certain type of madness. His original name was Keys, that's how you pronounce it, Q-A-Y-S. Layla has also been translated as ecstasy. So the meanings are ambiguous. So Majnun falls in love with Layla at the age of 10, and it is later reciprocated, but her parents think him unsuitable and refuse to let him see her. As the years pass by, he becomes mad with the pain of love, but this pain transforms him into a poet. If you look at the lives of many poets, musicians, and painters, often their art comes through pain and suffering. As I said earlier, most of the Sufi poets write of the pain that one must endure to realize this true love. If these poets, painters, and musicians did not suffer, they would not have the desire to go beyond, to find a safe haven on a higher level. Nor would they have produced the special art they did. Rumi again states, "A true lover doesn't follow any one religion. Be sure of that. Since in the religion of love, there is no irreverence or faith. When in love, body, mind, heart, and soul don't even exist. Become this, fall in love, and you will not be separated again." So although they are physically separated, Layla is in Majnun's heart 24/7, as they say. And this love brings forth beautiful poetry. He says, whoever is loved is beautiful. Well, this doesn't mean that whoever is beautiful is loved. There are girls more beautiful than Layla, they used to tell Majnun. Let us bring some to you. I do not love Layla for a form, Majnun would reply. Layla is like a cup in my hand. I drink wine from that cup. I'm in love with that wine. You have only eyes for the goblet and do not know the wine. A golden goblet studded with precious stones, but containing only vinegar, what use is that to me? An old broken gourd with wine is better in my eyes than 100 goblets of gold. We think about wine referring in symbology to spiritual wisdom, that has a deeper meaning. So nothing else in the world matters, not even physical appearance or mental state. He has gone beyond all that, though people only see the outer manifestation and think him mad. It gives me another chance to mention one of my favorite sayings by Plato. Heaven-sent madness is preferable to man-made sanity. Because we regard as being sane, we have to follow certain paths and certain ideas that are accepted by the world in general. People, if they're inspired by spirituality, become spontaneous and spiritual, they'll be regarded as mad. So anyway, Layla loved him just as much as he did her. And eventually she heard his poems recited by others. Because in those days, poetry was mainly spoken as it was in China and Japan in ancient times, and even in Europe, of course, with the Druids, etc., and the Celts. People had heard Majnun's poems and copied them by traveling about, reciting them as he did. So one of his poems is, I live for you. This is the madness bestowed upon me. What a true blessing that I found you, the last scent of love. So Layla replied to these poems by writing her own out and casting them to the wind. Many times a passerby would pick them up and pass them on to Majnun. So they had a sort of very loose communication. Eventually, Layla is given in marriage to another, but refuses to consummate the marriage as her heart is with Majnun. He learns of the marriage and her faithfulness to him, and that gives him some hope. He's now living in the wilderness, and even the wild animals love and protect him. Eventually, an old man, Zaid, arranges a clandestine meeting between the two, but she is not allowed to approach closer than 10 paces, a sort of social distancing, or anti-social distancing in this case. Majnun spontaneously recites his most beautiful love poetry to her, reinforcing their love. Layla's husband eventually dies, and Layla also shortly after dies of a broken heart because of her love for Majnun. I found that rather curious, because I thought if her husband died, then she may have had a chance to to reconnect with Majnun, but obviously she was still prevented from seeing him. When Majnun hears of her death, he repeatedly visits her grave until he too dies of grief and is buried beside her. So it's all very Romeo and Juliet. And one wonders if Shakespeare took his inspiration from such tales. Anyway, you may think this story has a tragic ending. But now I'll quote a few paragraphs from the end of an article on the story by J.T. Coker from the June-July 2000 edition of the magazine Sunrise, which is the Point Loma Theosophical Society's magazine at one time. In a dream, Zaid, who tends their joint grave, has a vision of them in paradise, where these two, an ancient soul tells him, these two friends are one, eternal companions. He is Majnun, the king of the world in right action, and she is Layla, the moon among idols in compassion. In the world, like unpierced rubies, they treasured their fidelity affectionately, but found no rest, and could not attain their heart's desire. Here, they suffer grief no more. So it will be until eternity. Whoever endures suffering and forbears in that world will be joyous and exalted in this world. On waking, Zaid realized that whoever would find a place in that world must tread on the lusts of this world. This world is dust and is perishable. That world is pure and eternal. Commit yourself to love's sanctuary and at once find freedom from your ego. Fly in love as an arrow towards its target. Love loosens the knots of being. Love is liberation from the vortex of egotism. In love, every cup of sorrow which bites into the soul gives it new life. Many a draught, bitter as poison, has become in love delicious. However agonizing the experience, if it is for love, it is well. So ends Nizami. Nizami was the writer of the story. So ends Nizami's poetic narrative of the story of Layla and Majnun. But to really appreciate and understand this work, it needs to be read and savoured in full. Is their story a medieval soap opera of epic proportions? It is, if that's what your heart hears. Is it a cautionary tale inculcating acceptance of earthly injustice and suffering in the Islamic faithful, who will be rewarded in the great by and by? He will surely serve, if that's your concern. Is Majnun man and Layla's soul, suffering because denied union while bounded by flesh? Yes, if your concern, your love, leads you to hear it that way. Is it an allegorical Sufi text instructing seekers in practical means for awakening to the supernal reality of their true spiritual nature? Only our hearts know for sure. Nizami bids us follow them. On the surface, it sounds as if Zaid found them both in a kind of devachan, where they had reached the fulfillment of earthly desires that he could not consummate. The poet Nizami, who first wrote the story, probably based upon still older tales, leaves it open to interpretation. Does it on a deeper level refer, as some of the fairy tales are said to do, to the trials of the aspirant on the way to enlightenment? The Sufis tell us to die before we die. In other words, to die to earthly concerns before we go through what we refer to as our physical death. Majnun's torment purified him and made him a poet, respected and admired all over the land. But for his suffering, he probably would not have achieved that. It was the physical that was preventing their union. Material concerns and constraints. Once they put off their physical bodies, those constraints were gone. In the same way, once we learn to overcome our own material constraints, we will achieve freedom. A mystic is devoted totally to the object of his devotion. But of course, they are really one. Theosophy teaches that the area occupied by the heart is the seat of the higher mind. It is where the transformation occurs and where head learning or intellectuality becomes heart learning. So it is the site of the alchemical transformation, the cauldron, if you like. The process is to become more heart-centered, because as the voice of the silence tells us, But even ignorance is better than head learning with no soul wisdom to illuminate and guide it. That's a strong statement that even ignorance is preferable to intellectual knowledge. Why is this? Because mere head learning does not transform. It just adds to the storehouse of facts in the brain, and more often as not swells the pride of the student, thinking that because they have garnered some information and can speak confidently on spiritual matters, that this somehow makes them an adept or a great teacher. Again, the voice of the silence says, false learning is rejected by the wise and scattered to the winds by the good law. Its wheel revolves for all, the humble and the proud. The doctrine of the eye is for the crowd, the doctrine of the heart for the elect. The first repeat in pride, behold, I know. The last, they who in humbleness have garnered law confess, thus have I heard. And this is because until we gain direct experience of spirituality, which is the only thing that counts in the end, we actually know nothing. We are just repeating what we have heard from others, and the humble ones realize that. So Sufism, like Zen, is a teaching based on cultivating direct experience. The difference between the two is that Sufism believes in a personal relationship with the divine, whereas Zen is impersonal. And this latter is more in tune with Theosophical teachings in many ways, though both are equally as valid in their right and are designed for different human natures. There's just a picture of Majnun and Layla in their paradise. Looks very nice, doesn't it? Wouldn't mind going there myself. So we can see in the tale of Majnun and Layla how love transformed and broke down barriers through pain. Often suffering makes us look deeper, shatters our complacency. We never want it, but we do need it at times. It's like a snake shedding a skin or a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis. It often comes as a result of change, which is another thing not many of us like, and I don't like it at all. H.P. Blavatsky writes in The Secret Doctrine, Volume 2, page 475, woe to those who live without suffering. Stagnation and death is the future of all that vegetates without a change. And how can there be a change for the better without proportionate suffering during the preceding stage? Is it not those only who have learned the deceptive value of earthly hopes and the elusive allurements of his external nature who are destined to solve the great problems of life, pain, and death? But she also says in the Key to Theosophy, for pure divine love is not merely the blossom of a human heart, but has its roots in eternity. Therefore, it is up the stairway of this love that the Sufi ascends, from the pure love between mortals up to emerging into the universal love. Rumi says, only from the heart can you touch the sky. This means that only by the alchemy of the heart can we experience the love at the heart of the universe. If a person is more head-centered, they need to develop the heart to be able to continue on the journey. Need to be a balance. It is true that the world needs more love and tenderness at this particular time. The mighty ocean of thought needs to be sweetened by the beauty of this love in its true sense. And this love needs to be disentangled from lust and sentimentality, which are predominant in modern society. Tales like the Conference of the Birds, Majnun and Layla, have a resonance in our souls and open doorways to a wider vista of understanding. Without love and compassion, humanity becomes less than human, giving itself to the control of soulless machines and maybe becoming in time a soulless machine itself. Like the wandering Majnun, we seek our lost love, seemingly always out of the reach of our reasoning mind. We have to focus on something that transcends the reason to find this love and to allow it to become our guiding star through all the complexities and dangers of earthly life. In the depths of our being, it tells us there is no death or change for the real self, only the promise of an eternal life and a pilgrimage through many lives to the very heart of love itself. We need to gather in ourselves the ingredients that will initiate the alchemical process and bring about the transformation and remove all the barriers we have placed between ourselves and this true love. In the voice of the silence, there are some very profound words which say, alas, alas, that all men should possess a lyre, be one with the great soul, and that possessing it, a lyre, should so little avail them. We live so short of what we truly are. We move around in a mist of misunderstanding and doubt. The world conspires to drown us in a sea of oblivion, the great dire heresy of separateness that weans us from the rest, to quote the voice of the silence again. But inside, deep inside, we know what we are. To use another of my favorite quotes from Plato, all learning is merely recollection, all true learning anyway. We need to awaken and remember the love that binds all things together as one, the beating heart of a humanity that cries out for understanding, for compassion. Theosophy describes meditation as the inexpressible yearning of the inner man or woman to go out towards the infinite. We all have this longing. We try to fill it with material goods and transitory feelings. But one day that mist will start to disperse, and we will discern the sun becoming clearer and clearer, the sun that shines in our hearts and souls, giving birth to the light that never shone on land or sea, but is an eternal radiance within each one of us. The poetry in our souls will open our eyes to the beauty of the world that we were blind to before, and the wonder of each human being behind the masks they were. We will then feel the presence of a golden age that never really went away, but was hidden by our mistaken view of what we truly are in our deepest essence. I'll end with a quote from Sri Chinmoy. Love is not a thing to understand. Love is not a thing to feel. Love is not a thing to give and receive. Love is a thing only to become and eternally be. Thank you for that.